Okay, if you're watching this video, you should have this same sheet, sheet 40, right with you. I'm going to basically repeat what I did in class on Wednesday of this week, where we had a class discussion on these several statements. If there's only a certain statement you need, then look for me to turn to that page. So I'll just go through these in order, and you can watch whichever ones you need to get a reminder about. I'll start with this first one. I will change the wording of this a little bit, but basically the point of this statement here is to get you thinking about, was this always a plan? Was war between Britain and the colonies planned by both sides? Or was at least some of the events that led up to it accidental or not the way that things were planned? So I want you to see this statement as being true. That it's a true statement, that both parts are really true. For one thing that you'd want to do is figure what are some events that were accidental? What were some that turned out not the way that they were intended? One that we discussed was the Boston Massacre event. It was not planned to be, the soldiers did not gather at the Boston Massacre site to shoot colonists. That's just what ended up happening as a result of the protesting. Another one that didn't go the way that it was planned, but did end up leading toward war, the Bostonians, the Sons of Liberty who threw out the tea, they didn't plan for Parliament to react the way that it did. They thought they would get a different result from it. So that could be one on the list. Another one that came up in each class was what happened at Lexington. Kind of similar to the Boston Massacre, because the soldiers that went to Lexington were not going to that town to start a war. They weren't even going there to have a battle. They're soldiers, so they're bringing weapons. But remember, they had a very different purpose. They're going there, they're thinking they're just going to get Samuel Adams and J.H., John Hancock. Those would be the main three that you could use as part of your answer. We also discussed this part of this statement, that both sides weren't planning to go to war. They both would have a lot to lose from going to war. Britain needed so really, again, in class we talked about the need. They need each other, or they benefit a lot from each other. So, there, they benefit from each other. So, colonies gave things to Britain, Britain gave things to the colonies, or sold things, traded things back and forth. So it wouldn't be fair to say that the plan was that either side would go to war. There is a certain point, and we could argue about whether it was in the year 1773, or did it happen in 1774, or maybe even as late as 1775, that one or both of those sides did end up planning on some of that. You could think about the Continental Congress meeting in 1774. We talked about the Olive Branch letter or petition that was sent by that Continental Congress. That was an attempt at peace. So this helps to show that the colonies weren't always planning to go to war. In fact, I think in each section we looked at, these are some of the words of that Olive Branch petition. These are some of these rebels of the Continental Congress saying they are faithful subjects, they are willing at all times in the interest of their mother country. So this is not a group of colonists that are talking about war. This is an example of them trying to avoid war. Yes, at some point Britain did seem to be planning for war. At some point the colonists, or some colonists, seem to be as well. But the key word here is always. Were they always planning to go to war? Something must have changed in one of these years, but you can't show that they were always planning, that this was the idea all the way along. Okay, so I'm moving on from this one. You can turn with me to the second page. This was the next one that we discussed in class, that colonists were protesting because they refused to pay any taxes. Okay. Again, the wording here might be a bit confusing. Some people didn't understand when I said they, I mean the colonists were protesting because they, the colonists, refused to pay any taxes. So you might have messed up on that part. And some people missed the word because. So we're looking for a cause-effect relationship. Sorry. Another way to think of this one, or another way to see this one, well, never mind. I'll just move on here. They were protesting because they refused to pay. Really this word here, were they trying to avoid any kinds of taxes? And that's part of why this is false. That's not what the colonists were saying. They weren't going against every kind of tax just because it was a tax. It was this idea of getting taxed without having a representation, without a voice, or without some kind of vote in Britain's government, in that parliament. That's the issue. That's what these colonists were protesting against. That was their problem with this. They wanted a voice, they wanted a vote, they wanted a say. Another word we've used is representation. They wanted representative in Parliament. And as long as Parliament's not giving them that, as long as Britain's government's not offering that to them, those are the taxes that they're going to keep protesting against. So this is really the key, what we're looking for as part of your answer. Another thing you can say is that they were also protesting not just because of that, but they protested against some laws that were not taxes. Also, laws that didn't require a tax or didn't order them to pay some kind of a tax. So I'll pause a moment and see if you can think of one of them. One would be the Quartering Act. I'll abbreviate here. They also are against those intolerable acts. None of those required a tax. So those would be a couple of other examples. A full credit answer would mention both of these things. A full credit answer would show you understand this and this. Okay, I'm going to move on to the third statement here. And one thing we pointed out in class is this only one reason. Historians know that it's very, very rare, if maybe even never, that there's only one reason for something. So that's one clue that this is false. And specifically, we could focus on another word of this. Britain's government did make laws about the colonies, that's all true. But were they all meant to punish the colonists? No, that's not fair. Now, there was one set of laws that was meant to punish them. Can you think what those were before I write it down? It's again those intolerable acts. The last set of laws that Parliament passes on these colonies was this set of laws. They were meant to punish. We've been very clear about that. But the major reason for most other laws, including the Sugar Act, including the Stamp Act, Townshend Acts, all these other ones, was about money, right? It was that debt. Here's how you spell debt. It was that debt that Britain needed to pay off from that French and Indian War. I'm abbreviating F&I War. So that's where that debt had come from. That's what a lot of these laws were meant to do, to either get money or to save money. I hope we got the main idea on this one. I'm going a little bit fast, but again, these are things that we've been mentioning and that have come up in multiple topics. So we'll move on to the last one for just a moment. This is focusing on the protests. So the question is, with this one, is it true that they succeeded? Here we have the word some. It wouldn't be fair to say that all protests succeeded. Also, it wouldn't be fair to say none of the protests succeeded. But some of them did, so we have to see that this one is true. And I'd look for you to be able to give me at least one, if not two, examples of protests that did that. One would be maybe the boycotts. You could also mention some of those petitions, or another would be letters that were sent. So again, this is those three different levels, that high, medium, and low level of protesting. The lower level, those riots that we looked at were not so successful. So again, we can't say that all of them were. And again, if we're looking at them changing their actions, I guess you could even mention this form of protest. It did make them change their actions, although I'd want to be sure that you were clear on how it didn't quite change the actions of Parliament the way that the Sons of Liberty expected. So we got 2 true, 2 false. Again, I'm looking for you to be able to give me clear reasons and understanding of why in about 1 paragraph each. So these are about paragraph length kind of answers. Maybe about 4 up to maybe 5 sentences each. And this would happen during class. I'll have more details here on Schoology, so look around for those somewhere near wherever you found this video. And I will stop right here. Again, this would be your guide. So you can use anything on here, anything else in your notes, anything else in your brain that works as well.